Hello, classmates, colleagues, and Dr. Abraham. Today I am honored to present my study entitled Multimedia Methods to Enhance the Learning Experience in Higher Education Online Real Estate Classes. I am Regina Brown, a student at Liberty University. This presentation is prepared for Education 734 class on today, which is May 5th, 2020. I am also a college instructor teaching real estate business courses at a college and a university. Multimedia in real estate online education. Business courses in higher education, specifically real estate education topics, include intangible concepts. The concepts are difficult to illustrate and challenging for students to comprehend. Some examples include legal terms, financial calculations, customer service business practices, and property rights. To fully engage students and guide them to learn the concepts, instructors like myself are challenged to design engaging and interactive instructional lessons using multimedia tools. The key to effective online courses is good instructional design. The careful and intentional design is particularly important for low processing learners, but should also be used for medium and high level learners for maximum effectiveness. As Meyer states in his book, meaningful learning depends on being able to carry out these three cognitive processes: sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. And in order to learn deeply, we have to engage in a lot of processing. That's from Dr. Richard E. Meyer. This paper will fully explore 5 components of effective instructional design utilizing multimedia principles. In addition, a sample real estate lesson called Buy versus Rent is included in the appendix. A real estate instructional lesson designed with multimedia principles illustrates the 5 components as follows. Number 1 is decorative graphics. Those appeal to students and visually motivate them psychologically. Number 2 are financial concepts illustrated with the application of graphs and graphics and charts. Number 3 is audio narration with limited on-screen text. Number 4 is segmentation of concepts presented in short, digestible clips. And number 5 is self-pacing by the students themselves, so they have the time and space to cognitively process each concept before moving on to the next one. Online courses require completely different instructional methods compared to live instruction. There is a perception, particularly among those who have not yet experienced e-learning, that is much less rigorous for learners and teachers than face-to-face classroom-based learning. That's a quote from McSweeney and Donnelly, 2009. There is a myth that online courses are simpler and easier than live in-person classes. But the truth is that online courses often take substantial more time and effort to develop in advance of the course offering. The course must be designed by the instructor or course designer, which may require meticulous, detailed work. Online course design also requires a certain level of technical skill, depending on the platform, the medium, and the subject being taught. Certain technical skills are required by the students as well, so they can view the content, understand expectations, respond accordingly, and upload their submissions. Lastly, students need computer access and internet capability. This cannot simply be taken for granted, as some students do not have sufficient computer access at home, or they're lacking the equipment altogether. Now let's talk about synchronous versus asynchronous courses. The 2 primary types of online courses are synchronous and asynchronous. In both types of courses, the instructor guides students by posting announcements, commenting in discussion posts, and giving feedback when grading. The difference is a simultaneous live interaction or the lack thereof. In synchronous courses, the instructor and the students attend live classes at specific weekly times, just like they would attend a live classroom. However, the classes are held virtually, typically via video conference. On the other hand, asynchronous courses require no class meetings at set times. The students work completely on their own. This instructor interaction is not live in real time. Let's talk about the advantages of synchronous courses. The main advantage of synchronous instruction is a live instructor guidance which mimics a classroom setting. The instructor can give a lecture or teach a lesson while students listen and respond. Students view the instructor with a video feed and they listen to the audio. This type of interaction is extremely critical for students who require hands-on assistance. They can ask questions, gain instructor feedback immediately. Synchronous courses are more convenient than live courses because both instructor and student can be located anywhere they have internet access. In other words, the classroom can be global, attracting students from all over the world. It's not limited to a specific geographic area. A quote from Nagmani says, "Supplementing lectures with multimedia presentations are known to increase clarity, engage learners, and sustain their levels of interest in the class." Despite its advantages, there are some disadvantages to synchronous instruction. When a class is held at a certain time, students may have work schedules that may conflict with the class schedule. In addition to job duties, higher ed students often have families for whom they must care, including children, parents, siblings, and spouses. In order to attend a synchronous class, they would need to find childcare or arrange for assistance with family care. Regional time zones is another factor that could be a disadvantage in synchronous classrooms. For example, classes held at 8 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time would translate to 5 o'clock a.m. Pacific Time, making class attendance difficult or nearly impossible for students on the West Coast. This time zone difference is magnified for students living internationally or abroad. Asynchronous instruction has many advantages. Students can work at their own pace on their own schedule. There are no set class times, which makes it convenient for students who cannot dedicate specific days or hours in their schedule on a weekly basis. Therefore, asynchronous classes are a perfect solution for students who travel for work or serve in the military overseas. Military service members may be stationed at sea without internet access for several days at a time, so synchronous education allows them the flexibility to work around their schedule. Blended learning, according to the author Poon, is a combination of multiple teaching styles and delivery methods which aim to complement each other and work to support and enhance student learning. That's Poon 2013. The instructor's goals, according to author Poon, is to increase the level of student engagement. Asynchronous course disadvantages. Although there are many advantages, asynchronous courses also have disadvantages. Students must be extremely self-disciplined to read, study, and understand the coursework and complete all of their assignments on time on their own. There's no live instructor guidance, which means students have less input and direction from instructors. Communication is usually limited to written correspondence, emails, or online messages. For the students who are struggling, the risk of failure in asynchronous courses is very high. Many students need more live interaction than asynchronous courses can provide. A thesis statement. Even with the many advantages of online classes, they can lead to student disengagement. The question is, how do instructors fully engage students and promote learning in an asynchronous online higher education classroom? The answer is that lessons must involve the content that is designed specifically for online instruction. It should be engaging, interactive, and still retain the instructional aspects of a live classroom experience. Multimedia tools help guide students to learn the concepts with maximum interactivity. The bottom line is that interactivity leads to engagement. Engagement leads to application, and application leads to retention of the course material. Let's talk for a moment about cognitive processing. Cognitive load theory is based on the fact that the human mind can only process a certain amount of information at once, especially if it's instructional content. Cognitive load is defined by Ayres as the total load placed on working memory by instructional information. That's Ayres, 2015, page 631. The author identifies 3 types of cognitive loads: intrinsic, extraneous, and germane. An intrinsic load refers to the complexity or difficulty of the information as received by the learner. The extraneous load means there's information overload of irrelevant material, and that should be eliminated. The germane load is a processing load that is related to the learning process. That explains why it's so important to design a multimedia course that facilitates effective learning and does not overwhelm the cognitive learning process. Now let's talk about multimedia principles and how they fit in. Effective instructional design with multimedia follows basic principles. They're researched and reviewed in the literature. Mayer's principle of multimedia learning is that people can learn more deeply from words and pictures together. That's in McGraw-Hill 2020. Than from solely the words alone. To incorporate multimedia learning most effectively, instructors need to first remember that multimedia learning simply incorporates words and pictures. Therefore, it can be any type of graphic or illustration, according to McGraw-Hill 2020, page 2. The graphics can be represented in all types of educational materials: textbooks, slide decks, computer screens, and instructor drawings on the whiteboard. Dr. Richard E. Mayer's groundbreaking research in the field of education lists 7 learning-related principles which will be referenced in this paper. The first is the multimedia principle, which basically means that we should use words and graphics in our instructional methods rather than just words alone. The second is the contiguity principle. That means that words need to be aligned to the corresponding graphics. The third is modality principle. That means to present words as audio narration rather than on-screen text. The fourth is the redundancy principle, which means explaining visuals with words in audio or text, but not both simultaneously. The fifth is the coherence principle, which means that adding additional learning can actually hurt the learning experience. The fifth is the coherence principle, which means that adding additional material, too much material, can actually hurt the learning process. The sixth is the personalization principle. In other words, using conversational style and virtual coaches to personally relate to the student. Number 7 is the segmenting and the pre-training principles, which is managing complexity by breaking lessons down into parts. In this paper, 5 components will be reviewed for their contribution to the effective online classroom in higher education, and specifically when it relates to a real estate business course. Those 5 components are: number 1, decorative graphics; number 2, financial concepts illustrated; number 3, audio narration; number 4, segmentation; and number 5, self-paced modules. Finally, a sample real estate lesson will be exhibited as an example of these 5 multimedia principles in action. Multimedia is a method that can help attract and build the attention of the user in educational courses, according to Liu and Beamer, 1997. Let's start talking about the 5 components, with the first one Component number 1, decorative graphics. The first component is decorative graphics, which are added to the slide, screen, or instructional material. Decorative graphics are defined as non-essential graphics, which are not required because they do not convey the learning concepts themselves. That includes photos, illustrations, vector art, or line art drawing. The multimedia principle is Mayer's theory that learning is more effective when both words and corresponding graphics are conveyed for learners. And that is in Clark and Mayer 2016. What constitutes an effective graphic? It can be a photograph, a scientific drawing, chart, a graph, an illustration, a cartoon, or even a video. Continuing that theory, the contiguity principle is to align words to corresponding graphics. That's from Clark and Mayer 2016. In other words, the graphic and the text should be integrated rather than physically separated. Integrating text and graphics together leads to a very powerful message that learners understand more comprehensively. It could be multiple colors, a single color, or just simply black and white. An example would be a professional stock art of a college student doing homework on a computer. Here's an example. What are the advantages of decorative graphics? Decorative graphics are designed to be colorful and catch attention. Although they are not essential to the content, they are relevant to the topic. An example is a graphic of a student who may look like the student or a person in a similar situation, which visually appeals to the student because they perceive similarity. An example would be a graphic of a Hispanic student, which would help Hispanic students relate to the course lesson. Psychological motivation with the personal association is very strong. Online courses may feel impersonal and emotionally detached. The representation of decorative images, although not specifically contributing course content, can help students to feel connected. A strong human connection anchors students, and that provides motivation. In his video presentation, Mayer explains his multimedia principle and states that information comes in from the outside world, and we have a photographic view of the world through our eyes. That's in Mayer's video in 2020. Multimedia is relevant to instructional design because the course designer must know what graphics to use and where to place them. Also, the type of text used with the graphics is very important. Now, what are the disadvantages of decorative graphics? On the other hand, decorative graphics may distract from the overall message. The graphics may be deemed irrelevant if they cause the student to lose focus. Perhaps the graphics are too bright or detailed, and they shift attention away from the instructional message to the graphics themselves. Decorative graphics may cause cognitive overload as students attempt to process both the message, the text and/or audio, along with the graphics. One of the basic principles of Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia states that each channel has limited processing capacity, and active learning requires coordination of the cognitive processes. And that's from Ayers 2015, page 631. Lastly, sight-impaired students cannot view graphics, so they need to include an image tag. This label allows the graphic to be understood by special equipment utilized by sight-impaired students. For example, with an image of a student using a computer, the image tag may be labeled "Student Working on Computer." That way the student will be able to decipher the graphic as a decorative graphic and still understand how it corresponds with the lesson. What are the best practices for decorative graphics? To include decorative graphics in an online course, the instructor or course designer should follow best design practices. The graphic needs to align with the slide topic and complement the text. Compared to the text, illustration, or concept, the decorative graphic cannot distract, overwhelm, or overpower the topic. It needs to subtly accompany the message and supplement it. This follows the coherence principle. Adding too much material can hurt the learning, especially when it's irrelevant to the topic or it does not contribute to the lesson. Lastly, with graphics, there is the danger of copyright infringement. The internet provides easy access to millions of graphics at the click of a finger, and instructors need to be cautious to copy only those graphics which are permitted for educational reuse. Otherwise, the instructor and the educational institution risk being sued for copyright infringement. Let's move on to the second component, which is financial concepts illustrated. Financial concept illustrations are defined as graphics and graphs that demonstrate concepts requiring quantitative reasoning. The most common types are tables, charts, and graphs. Tables have rows and columns that contain numerical figures. Graphs refers to bar charts, pie charts, line charts, and other types of graphs. These types of illustrations help the course concepts to stand out visually. They are simple to understand and readily digestible. Illustrating financial concepts serves to sharpen students' cognitive thinking. The graphs and charts can lead to a stated or unstated conclusion. In other words, the summary can be explicitly stated. For example, this chart shows that home ownership is a better financial investment than renting. Or it can be implied implicitly after explaining the graph. Clark and Mayer make a strong case for the use of appropriate graphics along with text in the classroom learning environment. Quote, "The rationale for our recommendation is that people are more likely to understand material when they engage in active learning. That is, when they engage in relevant cognitive processing, such as attending to the relevant material in the lesson, mentally organizing the material into a coherent cognitive presentation, and mentally integrating the material with their existing knowledge." And that's from Clark and Mayer, 2016, page 5. Multimedia presentations help the students mentally connect the words in the graphics, which further their understanding through the cognitive process. When students are able to make that connection, the learning is more meaningful and they're more motivated to continue learning. It also helps them apply the knowledge to their previous knowledge and integrate the information into a practical usage. Let's take a look at an example. What are the advantages of financial concepts being illustrated? By illustrating financial concepts with a sample situation, students gain insight. It helps them to make sense of the figures, anchor them to a tangible concept, and connect the lesson cognitively. An incomprehensible problem in which a student is stuck and cannot cognitively process the solution can become unlocked with graphics, causing an aha moment, also known as a eureka moment. It's like connecting puzzle pieces mentally. Students can grasp complex concepts and once learned, apply them to other situations. What are the disadvantages of financial concepts being illustrated? However, an illustration with too many numbers may cause cognitive overload. Graphs that involve a series of numbers, complex equations, or advanced layers might confuse students instead of clarifying the lesson. In addition, some students may not have the necessary subject matter background or grasp of math. Students who struggle with numbers may still have difficulty understanding graphs and charts. Lastly, if a financial concept illustration is oversimplified, the student may not be able to transport the concept and apply it to other scenarios. What are the best practices for financial concepts, illustrations. In producing illustrations for financial concepts, best practices should be followed to create the most effective illustration. Tables need to be simple, with a maximum of 5 columns and 5 rows. However, 3 of each is preferable for the most effective cognitive processing. Small abbreviated numerals are best for cognitive processing. In other words, the fewer the numbers, the better. If, for example, the number is 1,839,527 it can be rounded and abbreviated as 1.8 million. A percentage difference of 27.94% should be written as simply 28%. Lastly, if the chart has a legend, the legend key should be placed directly under the chart where it's closest to the figures. Working memory determines how the learner processes new information relating to previous knowledge. Mayer says in McGraw-Hill, to make learning effective, our presentation material should have an understandable structure and it should guide the learner in making a mental model. That's McGraw-Hill 2020, page 3. When generating charts and graphs, instructors should pay attention to the colors involved. Colors need to complement each other as well as coordinate with the overall color scheme of the instructional lesson. Instructors should carefully select a color scheme to use throughout the entire lesson. A unified color scheme produces harmony and familiarity. When students do not have to struggle to understand each chart from scratch, it reduces the cognitive processing load. On the other hand, adjacent colors need to contrast with each other, right? So that each section is clearly delineated. In other words, yellow and red can be side by side because they contrast. But yellow and gold should not be side by side because they are too similar. Lastly, the numbers and text should be as close as possible to the colored sections they represent. The legend, numbers, and percentages need to be placed on top of the sections they represent. The experience for students will then be magnified. That follows the contiguity principle, align words to corresponding graphics. Let's move on to component 3, which is audio narration. Audio narration is defined as text verbalized through voice and heard by students. It is typically recorded in advance and attached to specific slides or screens. It may be a word-for-word reading of a script or the screen text, or it may be the instructor's explanation for a particular slide. Its purpose is to explain the concepts on the screen or the slide. It allows the student to learn more than simply reading the lesson for themselves. Audio narration follows the modality principle. Present words as audio narration rather than on-screen text. And that's from Clark and Mayer 2016. The modality principle states that low experience learners more successfully understand information that uses narration rather than on-screen text. And that's a quote from Oberfohl and Correa 2016, page 607. The reason is because of the concept of cognitive overload. On-screen text combined with graphics may be overwhelming for the visual channel to process at once. It's recommended that some of the information be offloaded into the auditory channel so the learner can cognitively process the data quickly without becoming overwhelmed. Quote, when it's feasible to use audio, there is a considerable evidence that presenting words in audio rather than on-screen text can result in significant learning gains. That's from Clark and Mayer 2016, page 113. Moreno states that the most efficient way to present verbal material is through the auditory channel because it does not compete with the pictures for cognitive resources. That's from Moreno 2006, page 152. This study supports the modality principle. present words as audio speech rather than printed text. Clark and Mayer say to avoid multimedia presentations where all words are in printed rather than spoken form, especially when the graphic is complex, the words are familiar, and the lesson is fast-paced. That's Clark and Mayer 2016, page 115. The audio may be narrated by the instructor or by another person. An audiobook is a good example of narration. Audio narration is implemented using modern technology tools. Instructors should focus on increasing the use of technology to assist delivery, provide further support to students, and complement the face-to-face delivery. That's from Poon, 2013. Due to the redundancy principle, explain visuals with words and audio or text but not both, lessons with audio narration should not include the full text on the screen. Redundant refers to the audio which repeats the on-screen text. The redundancy principle, which is similar to the modality principle, advises not to add printed text to a graphic that's narrated. Explain graphics either with on-screen text or audio narration, but not both. That's according to Clark and Mayer, 2016, page 133. On the other hand, modality takes it a step further and encourages instructional designers to eliminate on-screen text in favor of narration only. That's from Oberfell and Correa, 2016, page 607. Mayer presents, quote, empirical evidence showing that people learn better from concurrent graphics and audio than from concurrent graphics, audio, and on-screen text, end of quote, from Clark and Mayer, 2016, page 131. The reason is because working memory will be overloaded when students are provided with both spoken and written text simultaneously. And that's paraphrased from Ozdemir Ismaila and Sanhin Ismaili, 2016, page 1. However, closed captioning at the bottom of the screen for hearing impaired students is an exception to this rule. Let's take a look at an example of audio narration. What are the advantages of audio narration? There are many advantages. First, verbal narration triggers the audio sensory learning channel, which allows the student to receive more information verbally and yet reduce the cognitive processing by the eyes. Second, human voice adds a strong human element and a psychological connection for students, which leads to motivation and accountability. For a student, hearing a real person's voice is the next best thing to seeing a live instructor. A friendly and calm, yet energetic voice can bring both vitality and authority to the lesson. Speaking audibly, the instructor can offer more details, give examples, and share stories that are more thorough than the text content by itself. This adheres to the personalization principle, which is using conversational style whenever possible. That's according to Clark and Mayer, 2016. Audio narration serves an important purpose by demonstrating how to pronounce complex terms in the lesson. Third, audio narration only has to be completed once, and it can be reused over again for future courses. Compare this to a live instructional lecture, which the instructor has to recreate again and again for each course every time he or she teaches the course. Audio narration appeals to students who shy away from reading. This includes students with reading disabilities, students whose reading skills are not fully developed, and those students who simply prefer not to read. Audio is also preferred by students who are not native English speakers and are not yet confident reading and comprehending the lesson in English. Listening to audio helps them comprehend the lesson more readily. Audio narration appeals to students and helps them apply the knowledge more readily because it's processed through a different channel than the graphics. Mayer's cognitive theory explains how an educational multimedia presentation is processed by the learners. Quote, with two separate channels, the learner is able to work with more information because the varying presentations of material are processed differently. That's from McGraw-Hill 2020, page 2. Words, either text or audio, are processed through the sensory memory by the ears and the eyes, whereas graphics, pictures, are processed by the eyes in the sensory memory. From there, it gets processed in the working memory and on to the long-term memory. So just what are the disadvantages of audio narration? Even though audio narration has many advantages, it also has disadvantages. If the audio narration is too lengthy, the content can become confusing for students. When recording, instructors may want to save time and record on the fly without a script. However, this may lead to sporadic outbursts, scattered thoughts, meandering off topic, all of which distract from the lesson's focus. Untrained narrators can be monotonous, and after a while, students mentally tune out. Or they may speak too fast for students to keep pace. Heavy accents may also detract from the content, especially if the narrator speaks at a fast clip. Another disadvantage is that closed captioning must be produced for hearing impaired students and added to the instructional lesson. This is required by ADA standards. Producing audio narration is extremely labor-intensive. Each module requires research and a script carefully written in advance. The narration should be synced to the slide's bullet points or the animation of graphics, which is very time-consuming. Audio production involves a quiet recording studio, a professional microphone, recording software, and related equipment. The narrator may have to record the content several times to get it right. Audio clips are then saved and edited using professional software, which takes even more time than the actual recording itself. In some cases, a professional audio engineer may need to be hired or consulted. What are the best practices for audio narration? For instructors to make the best use of audio narration, they must pronounce words clearly and enunciate slowly so students can grasp the concepts cognitively. Complex terms need to be articulated correctly for students to learn these concepts. The narrator needs to pause for students to cognitively process the information. The intonation or verbal pitch should be varied so it adds dimension and does not sound monotonous. An expressive tone that helps students connect is an upbeat, confident voice, although not too high of a pitch, and definitely no robotic voices. Computerized narration is a strong turnoff for most students who will simply stop listening to the audio. Faculty need to learn and understand the social construction of learning in order to make the strongest impact on their students. And that's a quote from McSweeney and Donnelly, 2009. Let's move on to component 4, segmentation. Segmentation is content that has been divided into short consumable modules so students can easily digest the content. Segmenting lessons into modules is beneficial when the content is advanced, accelerated, or complex. As an example, a 1-hour lecture may be recorded and then divided into 12 separate clips, each about 5 minutes long. This lesson can be recorded in advance with instructor audio narration, and each slide would have its own separate audio so that students can take the time to read, digest, and then advance at their own pace. The process of grouping information together into short digestible chunks is also known as chunking. Segmentation follows the segmenting and pre-training principles, which are manage complexity by breaking the lesson into parts. That's from Clark and Mayer, 2016. Here's an example. What are the advantages of segmentation? Because segmentation divides an extensive course into short modules or lessons, the student's cognitive processing load is eased. Concepts make sense when grouped and presented in a logical arrangement. For students whose minds think logically, the segmentation helps them develop each part and mentally piece together the whole thing. For students who are having difficulty understanding a complex topic or they're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of new information, segmentation allows them to stop learning, pause to cognitively process the knowledge, and then start once again when they comprehend the topic. What are the disadvantages of segmentation? For all its advantages, segmentation also has disadvantages. First, it's time-consuming to design lessons that naturally fall into short segments. The content may be difficult to break up evenly. For example, some modules may naturally be 15 minutes, while others are as short as only 2 minutes. Or there is also a lengthy video recording that must be clipped up into shorter videos, which involves watching the video, calculating timing, and then editing it with professional software. Just like with the narration, it's labor-intensive to produce segments that are just the right length. Lastly, segmentation gives students the opportunity to leave early. They can easily choose to end their study session at the end of any short module, rather than sit and watch the entire session at once. What are the best practices to segmentation? For segmentation to be most effective, the modules need to be designed in advance, prior to narrating the course. Otherwise, it can be difficult to divide the audio into short clips later. That means writing out scripts for each screen or slide before starting the audio or video aspects. Logically cohesive sections need to be grouped together to help students comprehend each section before moving on to the next one. When attempting to enhance the learner's educational experience, the course designer must plan carefully to accommodate students' needs, while not overloading their short-term memory. To that end, quote, words should remain available to the learner for memory support, end quote. If the terms are technical, lengthy, unfamiliar, or used for reference in the future. That's according to Clark and Mayer, 2016, pages 117 to 118. Lastly, ensure there is sufficient flow from one sequential topic to the next. In other words, it needs to include transitions that help connect each module. Component number 5, self-paced modules. Self-paced modules are defined as lessons in which students control the ability to move forward through the lesson modules at their own pace. The student controls the ability to stop and start each lesson at their own convenience. Ideally, the multimedia principle of segmentation has already been applied to the modules, and they're grouped into short, digestible chunks. Each module is presented upon demand, and students click buttons to move forward, backward, or repeat part of a module. It also gives the opportunity to add activities or brief quizzes between each module, rather than one long lecture followed by a long test. Self-pacing follows the personalization principle to some extent because students customize their course their own way. That's from Clark and Mayer, 2016. Mayer's advice on self-paced modules is that presenting concurrent narration, on-screen text, and static graphics under learner control is less likely to cause cognitive overload in the visual channel. That's a quote from Clark and Mayer, 2016, page 141. The reason is because the student has adequate time and space to process the data cognitively. Here's an example of a self-paced module. Notice the buttons the student can press to move forward, backward, or pause. There's also a button for closed caption. What are the advantages of self-paced modules? When learning a lesson in a self-paced module, students can pause as needed, rewind, and replay modules. The ability of students to control pace and timing is one of the primary advantages of self-paced modules. Cifuentes et al. States that, quote, diligent learners often like to view course content over and over and prefer to receive course content through multiple modes. That's in 2016, page 557. Cognitive processing is eased and students can rapidly make sense of the material when they're moving forward at their own desired pace. An additional bonus of self-paced modules is that students must click the buttons to move forward. That means students are taking a physical action. They're being interactive and they are actually participating in the process. Alternatively, students could be asked to complete a short activity after completing each module. For example, a 3-question multiple-choice quiz would gauge comprehension and encourage accountability to the learning process. What are the disadvantages of self-paced modules? Compared to the above-mentioned advantages, self-paced modules also have some disadvantages. Students may opt to leave the lesson at the end of any module because it's a natural stopping point. Similar to audio narration and segmentation, building self-paced modules requires intensive time, effort, and skill on behalf of the instructor or the instructional designer. Lastly, technology may present challenges. Due to technical constraints, it may not always be possible to combine with audio narration. For example, embedding a PowerPoint slide deck in a Canvas course so that it opens as a slideshow requires the instructor and every student to be logged on to their college-based account, either Microsoft Office 365 or Google Docs, and invariably some, or perhaps many, students will not be able to fully access the slideshow as intended by the instructor. What are the best practices for self-paced modules? To use self-paced modules most effectively, instructors will need to test the digital platform for each medium type before posting the content. As mentioned above, technology platforms and access levels will play a key role in the success of an online lesson module. Instructors will want to ensure that self-paced modules can include audio narration so students can experience the full learning effect. Lastly, to prevent students from opting out and to keep them engaged, give students incentives to continue going and to finish all the modules. Students may positively anticipate completing a short 2 to 3 question quiz after each module, for example, which helps them feel confident that they're learning. At the end of the entire lesson, perhaps they can earn a badge or make a check mark on a list of courses. These examples help students visualize their progress and gain confidence during the learning experience. Now that you've been hearing so much about these 5 components, you're probably ready to see them in action, right? We have an example for you coming up. Demonstrated here is a course lesson extracted from Real Estate Principles, a college-level real estate business course. The topic is rent versus buy, which is a common scenario learned in this course. The concept illustrates various differences between purchasing a home, owning real estate, and renting a home, rental housing as a tenant. Appendix A is a slide deck for the real estate lesson. It was constructed in Microsoft PowerPoint, and the bullet points appear one at a time upon clicking forward. Appendix B displays the audio script for each slide. This is the actual text that will be narrated by the instructor. In an asynchronous course, this would be recorded in advance. Note that some of the figures are fictitious and designed solely for illustration purposes of the concepts shown. Bear in mind that real estate values, interest rates, and monthly payments can vary widely depending on the regional market, the local, state, and national economies, the funding supply and financing available, and the federal monetary policies at any given point in time. Let's watch this module together now. Well, what did you think? Did you see each of the 5 components illustrated in that short clip? It was only 7 minutes and 10 seconds. Conclusion. Using the multimedia design principles for an online college course, this paper has demonstrated how student interactivity leads to engagement, engagement leads to application, and application leads to retention. There were 5 multimedia components reviewed that can augment a real estate business course. First, decorative graphics that enrich the course content by providing relatable subjects and a humanistic touch. Second, financial concepts illustrated as tables, charts, or graphs provide grounding for the lesson. Third, audio narration substitutes for a live instructor by bringing a human element, which can help motivate students. Fourth is segmentation divides a long, complex lesson into short, digestible chunks. Fifth and last, self-paced modules engage students with a higher degree of interactivity because they select the pace at which they move forward, backward, or replay the lesson. In summary, an instructor can effectively employ multimedia principles to ensure students can enjoy the best learning experience possible and retain the knowledge for future. Thank you very much, and goodbye.